Ford, when is the last time we saw you? It was before 2020, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. It was either 18 or 19. It's pre-COVID, that's for sure. It's hard to believe
Yeah,
it's been that long.
it is hard to believe. And you had some family updates since the last time we saw you.
Oh golly, we are floating on a cloud. We have our first grandbaby, little Jack William Hemi, and boy, I'll never forget, Carmen, when we had our first child.
Uh-huh.
I called my mom, or my mom called me after spending a week with us, and she said, "Honey, I owe you an apology." And I said, "What for?" She said, "I lied to you your whole life." And I said, "What about?" She goes, "I've always told you there's nothing like having children." And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Oh, I was wrong. Grandbabies are way better." And of course, being a new dad, I couldn't imagine that. Then when we had our second child, I called my mom and I said, "Mom, how do you take all this love that you have for this child
Mm-hmm.
and divide it by another child that's on the way?" And I'll
Mm-hmm.
never forget the words she said. She said, "Honey," she said, "you don't divide your love, it multiplies."
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing I could say to parents who are looking forward to being grandparents,
Mm-hmm.
after having three children and now our first grandchild,
Mm-hmm.
it just continues to multiply.
Mhm.
And so
Oh,
it's a special time. And any grandparent out there knows exactly what I'm talking about. Thank you for asking.
yes. Well, Dave and Bill they're both grandparents.
That's right.
We've entered
Yeah.
that stage,
Yeah.
which everything you're saying, Ford,
Mhm.
amen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bill's got the one. I've got 6 now. 3
Oh
girls,
my.
3 boys.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But they're
Wow.
multiplying like rabbits over it.
Well, and the love's having a hard time keeping up, but it's trying. It's trying.
Oh, that's funny. But Carmen, I knew they were granddads because when I said that, both of them, they did the fist in the air thing. So I knew, I
Yes.
said, okay, they're definitely
Yeah.
granddads.
Yeah, I'm not there yet. I don't even have. I need son-in-laws first.
That's
right.
So I'm still waiting for the son-in-laws before I get to the grandbabies. So Ford, goodness gracious, the last couple of months, I have received texts from staff folks here. First, it was Carter. Carter was with you in Orlando, and it's so fun for me. Well, it was Carter, and then it was Kelly. But I don't even remember where we were on location somewhere, me, Dave, and Bill, and I get this text from Carter, and he was like, "OMG!" And sorry, Carter, if you're listening, maybe you didn't say it quite like that. But Carter is he's our hype boy. He is such a great cheerleader of everything that we do. He's our Orlando market manager, but he had just met you, and I get the biggest kick out of when people meet you for the first time, and they got to experience what we experienced back in 2018, and they're just going on and on and on and on and on about you. And it's like, we just write back and we're like, yes, it's almost like in Elf when he sees Santa. I know him. I know him. So it was fun the other day to get that text from Carter. And then Kelly was doing, I don't remember what she was doing, but she was doing some training online. And she said you messaged her too. So it's just, I'm so happy that our staff has had, encounters with you in the last couple of months. That's been really fun to see and hear.
Well, Carmen, you're too kind. It's so fun to get to meet your folks because they all just rave about you and the station and what you are doing there, the new building that's coming. I mean, the
Yes,
culture
yeah.
that you've built. So well done. And again, every time I see a Joy FM shirt on someone that works there, I know what's going to come out of their mouth, and it's always positive. So really well done. Thank
I
you for the
love
kind
that.
words.
If that's true, Ford, and I know that it is, it's partially thanks to you and the way that the Lord used you to help shape our culture.
Truly.
Well, thank you. And y'all know this. It is to God be the credit and the glory because anybody that knows my story, I'm kind of like Paul. You know that guy. This isn't about that guy. This is about what God's done in that guy. So thank you for saying that. And let's all keep giving God the credit for all that because
That's
he
right.
certainly deserves it.
We've got a couple places we want to go with this conversation, but can I just start right here? You've made an impact when your name becomes a verb. So we don't search for things, we Google them, right?
Right, yeah.
We don't have video chats, we Zoom. And when an organization is displaying signs of unhealth, the thing that we've said,
Well, hold on. 19, 20, 21, 22. Almost, will it be 5 years?
probably
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
4 or 5
that's about
years.
right.
Because we met you in 2018.
Yeah.
Truly, God
Those
ordained.
folks need to Ford Taylor it. That's what we
Yes.
say.
Yep.
It's true. You are part of our vernacular around here. And we all know what we're talking about. It's like, well, I guess we got to go Ford Taylor that.
Yep.
I mean, it's
That
Yeah,
could
true.
mean the 6-step apology.
Yep.
It could mean
accountability.
Stepping up,
accountability.
dealing with conflict in
Right.
the office place.
Mm-hmm.
I know where Carmen's going to go in a few minutes, and that's another place where we Ford Taylor things.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So how does that feel to know that you're a verb?
Well, again, you're too kind. It's never looked to be a verb, but thank you. That's very kind. And
What do you say when
it's
you?
kind of hard to respond.
Oh wow.
Well, we could go.
I have to be, I have to
Yeah.
be careful because we used to Bing things, right? We just Bing it. Now we
Uh-huh.
Google it, so we got to be careful that don't become Bing, right?
Mhm.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
Now there's branding to think about.
Yeah.
That's true.
So Ford, what does life look like for you right now? Are you still traveling around and doing your leadership conferences? Are you doing more stuff online? Like, what does it look like now for you?
Well, when COVID hit, people globally were saying, if you can't come, how are we going to hear from you? And I said, I don't know. I mean, you can use the online platform, but, so many of the countries we were going to, they don't speak English. And so when we would go, I'd have to have a translator.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was kind of hard. And so basically they taught me into doing a podcast, which I'd never really wanted to do, but we did a bunch of them. And then I found out you have to have a website to host it on. I said, well, if I'd known that, I never would have done it. I mean, I'm not a technology guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, finally did build a website, did a podcast, and started writing some blogs to continue helping people. Never really tried to grow any of that.
Mm-hmm.
A guy that gave us the name was called Ford Taylor Talks. And again, I never really, as y'all know, wanted it to be about Ford Taylor. I wanted it to be about the tools that God has used. And then my daughter got involved and she said, Dad, you need a tagline. And I said, well, why do you need a tagline? I mean, this
Yeah.
is stuff that's over my head. And she said, what do you think's the most important? And I said, well, sweetie, when we love and forgive unconditionally, our influence goes up. And when our influence goes up, we see not just our lives transform, but the people around us. And she's a marketing and salesperson in corporate America. And she says, Dad, why don't we just say, let's get lit? And I said, what? She goes, why don't, like, what? I said, I get that, but I'm a little old for getting lit.
Yeah.
And she said, no, love. So she came up with, she said, love, influence, transform.
Oh, wow.
And so one person said, let's call it Ford Taylor Talks. Another person said, let's get lit. So all of a sudden, that's how we were able to start reaching out to people. And
I love it.
and we're fortunate now that I'm not doing the international travel personally, but we have a lot of people,
Mhm.
taught, trained, and equipped to be
Mhm.
able to do it in multiple countries now in their languages as well as with translators. And so most of my focus now is in America.
Mhm.
I've been doing a lot more out and out, straight up consulting with businesses like I used to do in the old days.
Mhm.
And then now the big thing that excites me is we've shifted our model that y'all went to
Mhm.
back in 2018, and we're actually calling them city impact initiatives.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have cities that are calling us now, and so we'll coach them for 3 to 4 months on how to build a team across the city.
Mhm.
Then we bring them in the room for 2 days, give them part of the TL material, and teach them, number one, how to build relationships. Number two, how to have a common vision, purpose, and mission. And number three, how to sustain that, stay at the table, which is what we've historically done.
Mhm.
That's been my whole career in businesses. And then we coach them for another 6 to 8 to 12 months on the other side of the City Impact Initiative. And I got to tell you, of all the things that I've done, this, with this material, this is probably the most exciting to see what's
Mhm.
happening as these city leaders come together. And that's what your people attended in Orlando. And they
Yeah.
saw the little bit of a difference in what you saw because we're coaching on both sides of it now. So that's where I'm spending a lot of my time.
Let's stay there for just a couple of minutes, because anytime that Ford Taylor and just, well, first of all, your worldview, which we share, whenever you can influence city leaders, which influence the city, is going to be a good thing. And I think, there's a handful of things that stay at the top of my mind, things that I learned from you. And one thing that was so encouraging, and we've got a lot of new listeners, we've signed on to some new areas. Talk about the percentage of influence and how small enough that just so encouraged me. And I think the day and age in which we're living, the culture in which we're living, it can be pretty depressing and just think, oh, it's all but lost. And talk about your percentages of influence and the small number. Tell that story.
Yeah. So one thing we know, Carmen, that, I've been screaming for over 20 years. One of my favorite gospel songs, and I like the beat of it, but I think it has an unbelievable message from, 50 years ago. And it, it talks about, we as Christians, we're playing checkers while the devil is playing chess. Mm. And so for years, I've been saying, guys, we have got to go for the long haul. All of our competition, they understand how to influence, and as you've heard me talk, we can influence up, that's to our boss. We can influence across, that's our parents, our boss, our coach, our classroom teacher. Across, that's with our peers. A level of influence, down, with our employees, our kids. And, I don't like that terminology, but just I don't have time to explain it all, so I'll use that for now.
Yeah.
But there's a level of influence that most people forget, and that's the influence we have on ourselves. And then for us, we have influence with God. And so when you start with the perspective that we have 5 areas of influence, and one of the quotes that I say is, we all have influence, we might as well make it a positive one. But if we realize that everything we do is influence, every act that we do, according to the Bible, is an act of worship. And so no matter what we're doing, if we're driving our car, doing emails, doing this, doing a podcast, parenting, spousing, it's all about worship. And if we realize that our influence in all 5 of those areas makes a difference, and that we're all leaders, because leadership is about influence, and we influence in multiple organizations. So if people can really grasp that every minute of every day is about influence, then we start realizing how our competition is beating the tar out of us. They understand something that you're asking is to shift the culture of any organization. And an organization is 2 or more people. So that's a family, business, church, radio station, city, or nation. It only takes 3 to 5%. Well, that 3 to 5% has to have certain things in place. And when those are in place, they can shift the thinking of any organization. And that's what's happened to us in America. Our competition even wrote books before they started. And I used to beg people to read them, and it was hard to get them to hear it, that said, while we're about to convince America of, while we know it's not true, we can still convince them if we stick together. And so we as believers, if we in a city, I'll use your example, or a company or a church or a family or even a nation, if we truly could come up with a common vision, purpose, and mission, which means we have a common language and everybody's using that same language. Okay. And if we knew how to build those relationships, and if we knew how to take that common language and those relationships and stay at the table, sustain what we're doing. And if we go after the long haul, that 3 to 5% can grow. And then once you have the 3 to 5%, there's a group around you. I call that the inner core team and the core. They're bought into the vision. They're bought into the concept. And then the other 2 groups, the lean inners, which are considering joining what you're doing, they'll say, I want to be a part of that, because they'll trust that instead of the group that we call the lean outers. And typically it's the lean outers in a city or a company or any organization that throw the hand grenade in and implode it. And that's not always the enemy. Sometimes it's our own people who come in and throw the hand grenade in. And so we have to deal with the lean outers. We have to get them out of the organization. We make it their choice. Then the lean inners join that inner core and core. And then that very small 3 to 5%, it starts growing and accelerating very quickly. But you have to have the common tools, the common language to do that. And if you go, I could bring up 5 or 6 words right now that most of us wouldn't agree necessarily with what they're doing, and everybody would know what they mean.
Yeah, exactly.
But when we bring up our words, everybody doesn't know what they mean, because we've got 50,000 denominations. And so we have to come together with that common stuff at some point.
And just a point of clarity, and see if you agree with this or not, Ford, but when we talk about our competition, we're not, this is not a political statement. No. It's a statement of the secular humanist worldview over against a God-centered worldview. Is that kind of accurate and kind of what you're saying when you talk about the competition?
Absolutely. We only have one enemy, and it's not each other.
Yeah,
and so
right.
we, with that biblical kingdom worldview, y'all know that years ago in one of the cities I worked in, you may remember, I got called in a room and accused of witchcraft. And part of it was because I was giving a kingdom message. Guys, first is the kingdom. Seek the kingdom first and his justice and righteousness. Then things will follow. Preach the kingdom, then signs, miracles, and wonders will follow. Well, because we've been giving a Great Commission message for so many years, and we should not stop the Great Commission. Spread the gospel, make disciples. That should not stop. We've spent very little time making disciples, but we won't go there right now. But when you give a kingdom message, most people struggle with that, and you are correct. It's not about politics. I'll get hammered by people I know well for saying this if they listen, but our government, they can't save us.
No.
I mean, no offense, but God has to be the one that steps in, and we have to do our part if we want influence with him for him to step in.
Mm-hmm.
Really good.
One of the things that you mentioned is that we're all, in effect, leaders. You're a leader in some capacity because you have influence. I want to give you a scenario and just get your opinion on what could happen, because this is something that we see. We've got a prayer line, and we've got a prayer center on our website, and every day we see the prayer requests that come in. And it's not uncommon to see somebody that says, I'm not in management. I'm just a wage worker. I don't have any influence in my company. The people that I'm working with just make my life difficult. My boss is not supportive. How does someone that finds himself in a situation like that influence that culture to help start to turn things around?
Well, as you know, that's a pretty long answer, and a lot of it's wrapped up in this training that we do. But they can have an influence, especially Christians. What would happen? I would answer this person this way. So what would happen if your boss and your coworkers and your customers, whoever it is that you're around, what would happen if you showed them something they maybe have never seen before? What if they felt so much love from you, that you cared so much about them, that they started asking you, why do you do this for me? Why do you bring me a cup of coffee? Why do you come in and offer to help me when you see that I'm overloaded? And again, we as believers, if we start doing things that look like Jesus and not just talking like Jesus, our influence just goes through the roof. We have companies that would ask the same question early on, and we're now watching bosses baptize their employees at work. These things are happening in the ecclesia, not just in the local church, but in the ecclesia, the assembly of decision makers in the marketplace. It's a Greek word. And so, that's how you have influence, is mainly when your words, what you say to be believed to be true, whatever they are, when your words line up with your tone, how you say your words and how you behave, when that all lines up, that's where your influence is. If you say, I believe in Jesus, I believe in peace and patience, and we're not supposed to gossip, and then you listen to gossip and then you spread gossip, you're not going to have, you do. But here's the key for that person that asked the question. You do have influence. So to think you don't have influence, that's the first mistake. The real question is, what kind of influence? Because if you're in, I'm going to tell you just a real quick story. One of the companies we worked with in Tennessee, one of their key executives, rock star, loved him, felt a call to go work someplace else. And the CEO blessed it. And if I said where he went to work, everybody probably listening would know where it is. But he just felt God was calling him there. So he went on ground level. Within a year, he was in the C-suite. And he would text me regularly or message me. And on the last promotion he got, I said, tell me what happened. He said, well, they asked me, why is it that everything they give me, the team works together, the influence goes through the roof. And please don't hear this wrong, but he said, I pulled out my two manuals. I pulled out my TL manual and my ML, the missing link, which is the spiritual component of what we do. He said, there's not a question you can ask me that I can't answer out of these two manuals. But the real truth is, his influence. He went in as a transformed person on the ground level, and every time they gave him a new team to work with, the people around him changed and they became more productive. And so I would say no matter where you are in an organization, you have tremendous influence. It's just a matter of what kind of influence do you have.
Good. I want to go back to something that you hit on it, but it was going to be my next thing that I brought up. So let's just, again, a lot of new folks listening, and I think this is just a good one. But I remember you saying years ago, gossip may be the largest undiagnosed addiction in our world today. Whew, that has stayed with me. Great people talk about visions and ideas. That whole, actually, I probably do you start that way, or do you start at the top there and then go down?
Absolutely, great people. Yeah. You want me to do it, or you want to do it?
Yeah. You do it. You do it.
Okay.
I've got my notes right here, though. I've got my notes.
Well, you can do it if you want.
No, you do it. I want to hear it from you.
Okay. Great people talk about vision, ideas, and solutions. Average people talk about things. Small people talk about other people. Smaller people let them. Even smaller people join them. And even really small people, they spread it around. Mm-hmm. And so we ask people, where do you fall on that list? Yeah. And often believers are, let's be honest, we're the worst gossipers they are. In other words, we don't have the courage to go talk to the person that we ought to be talking to, so we tell someone else. Yeah. And if you want to read that other quote there, I truly believe that if we could learn to stop the gossip and learn not to be offended, that we could change or transform, if you want, any organization in about 48 hours.
Unpack that, because again, that was one of the segments of the time that we spent with you that first of all, let's be honest, you get with your girlfriends and it's such an easy thing to do, but that was probably one of the most convicting things of the time that I had with you. So unpack that a little bit, if we just stop doing that, the scripture that you use and how we could turn things around in 48 hours.
Yeah, well, let's use the definition of gossip first. Yep. Okay. It's when someone says something negative about another person, to someone who can't solve it. In other words, they're not part of the problem or part of the solution. And so if you called me and asked me something about a coworker, I would ask you, if you told me something, if you said it before I had a chance to stop you, if you said, hey, could I tell you something about Bill? I would ask you, is it positive? And if you said no, I'd say no. Go talk to Bill. I don't want to hear it. But if you said, yeah, I do want to hear it, because that's not gossip, because it's negative speak about someone. The problem is in church, we're told walk out Matthew 18, walk out Matthew 18. The problem is, it says go to that person one-on-one. Well, we don't really get taught how to go to that person one-on-one. And once we learn how to go to that person one-on-one, we find that most conflict gets resolved in one meeting. Why? We believe conflict is bad, but conflict is not bad. Unresolved conflict is bad. Conflict plus resolution leads to unity, engagement, and productivity. And so if we go talk to that person one-on-one in this posture is what I call it. Number one, we go in humility. And what does that mean? I may be wrong. So if I wanted to share something with you, Carmen, I might come say, Carmen, could I share something with you? I may be the only one in the world that feels this way. I may be wrong. Could I give you some feedback? So number one is we go in humility. Number two, we go in pre-forgiveness. In other words, if it is something that you did wrong that hurt someone, then you've already forgiven in case you're right before you go. Number three, we go in love. And all that means is I care more about you than I care about how you feel about me. Which means, what if what you did to me, you did to your kids or your coworkers or your employees, and you don't even know you're doing it? It's called a blind spot. But I care more about you that you're successful than I care if you don't love me anymore because I shared it. And then number four, we go with the truth, 100%, and the facts. Because sometimes the truth and the facts are not the same. But when we go that way, we found that well over 95% of the time, conflict is resolved. And so you don't have to go to Matthew 18, which is step two, bring another person or two with you just to hear what got said. And of course, if that doesn't work, you go to step 3, but you bring the ecclesia together. That's the word, assembly of decision makers together, and you share the conflict. And then that group judges whether who's wrong. If it gets to that level, which is very rare, most of the time the accuser is the one that's wrong, because typically the accused is willing to step up when they know that they've messed up and do the apology.
It's good. It's good stuff.
Well, that's going to lead us to a review of something that we've talked about and tried to practice, and it challenges our math every time. I don't know that we always get through all 6 steps, but we couldn't have this conversation without you, Ford, without asking you to help us a little bit through this 6-step apology, because that's an application of Matthew 18. It's how we do a biblical apology, and it's really effective when it's done from the heart and done right. And I joke about it because, again, we don't always get all the 6 steps, but it's important. Would you take a few minutes and just introduce our listeners to the 6-step apology?
Yeah, and something you just said there that you probably don't necessarily even know you said, at the depth of what you said, the depth of what that means, and that is that it's done from the heart. Mm-hmm. The 6 steps are important, but they're not as critical as that you really mean whichever steps you get that you can remember. Mm-hmm. But when you do all 6 of them, there's something about those 6 in combination that really shifts things. Mm-hmm. And the first step is, I'm going to reverse it now, say that Carmen came to me with something and she pointed something out, because it's more likely I would be the one to mess up than her. Okay. But let's say that she came to me and shared that something I had done was disrespectful. Let's use that for an example. And she's right. And let's say I did it and didn't even realize it. Now, if I realized it before she told me, I would have already gone and done the 6th step. But if I didn't realize it, so either way, the 6th step still works. But I would repeat back to her whatever the offense was. In other words, I wouldn't necessarily just say I was disrespectful. I would say, wow, Carmen, I did do that, whatever that is, and I would speak it back to her. And then I might say, and I agree with you, that was disrespectful. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is 3 simple words, and easy for men to say, I was. No, the second step is, I was wrong. The third step is, very simply, I am sorry. Or I apologize if you were a person that when you were a child were told, you're a sorry little son of a gun by a parent, teacher, whatever, and that word has a different meaning for you, just say, I apologize. So step number 1, state the offense. Number 2, I was wrong. Number 3, I am sorry. Number 4, will you, or when you can, will you forgive me? And the reason I add the when you can, some people struggle with forgiving on the spot. Now, the forgiver, based on the Bible, is the big winner. And we don't have time to do all that right now. We can do that if you want, or another time. But if you forgive quickly, you're the one that gets the biggest healing. So, but we do want to give people, don't put pressure on them to forgive you on the spot. That's why I say, will you, or when you can. And the other reason is lots of people, when they've apologized in the past, they've used a 3-step apology. They might, or 2, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? But they have no intentions of changing their behavior. And so they do it just to get out of the conversation. They just want to get it over with. But when you say will you, or when you can, it changes if you've done something in the past with will you to something different. Why? Because the 5th step now says, I'm willing to change. Why? The 5th step is, Carmen, I give you permission to hold me accountable to never behave that way or disrespectful to you or anybody else that you see me do that with. In other words, you have my permission to come call me out. And the 6th step is there anything else that I owe you an apology for, or anything else that you would like to talk about in this? And when you do all 6 of those, you can be pretty sure if you're doing it with people who care about you and that you care about, you're going to change. If for no other reason, you're just going to get tired of having to do the 6-step apology. I mean, just pure logic. You're just going to get tired of having to do it over and over again. So I'm just going to quit acting that way. But that's just the logical side. Yeah. The real side is that you really have a heart to want to change.
That has shifted things around here too. It truly has. And once you learn the 6-step apology, you can spot, in other settings where it's not the same vernacular, it's not have the same basis for frame of reference. It just feels different.
You can spot a cheap imitation all day long.
That's a good way to say it, for sure.
One of the things that you pointed out to us several years ago in talking about the 6 steps too is the importance of the I'm sorry or I apologize and not I'd like to.
Yeah.
I'd like to apologize. Yeah.
And again, I tell people in this 6 steps, if something's a little more comfortable for you to change the order, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
If you feel better, say, oh man, I was wrong when I did that. And then say what you did. I mean, or I'm so sorry. And then go back and do step 1 and 2.
Yeah.
But if you get all 6 steps in, but you're correct. There are some protocols that's not in the manual you have. I did finally put them on the PowerPoint, but that is one of the protocols, is that when you apologize, don't say, I would like to tell you I'm sorry, or I want to apologize. That is not an apology. That's a declaration that you want to. You're probably just a little too arrogant to do it. Or you're just a habit of doing it the wrong way. Mm-hmm. And mostly that's the case. People just don't even realize that's what they're doing. Mm. Yeah, but that's one of the protocols we say be very careful with.
Yeah, and it's funny because even in because I've been to Ford's seminars a couple of times, and I think someone said, I would like to apologize. And he goes, okay, then go ahead.
Well, I do that, Carmen. If I know people have been through our training and they come up to me and say, I owe you an apology for something, and they'll tell me what it is, and I'll say, then go ahead. I mean, I don't necessarily think they need to.
Yeah.
But if people need to apologize, that it's amazing what it does for them.
Yeah.
It's not what it does for you. It's what it does for them. And so it doesn't bother me to say, then go ahead. Over Thanksgiving last year, my son-in-law told me, of course, you know me, I've told my kids, Carmen, just so you know, y'all know I'm a real dad joke guy. I tell dad jokes all the time. You've been around them. And I've told them it's going to get worse. And they said, why? I said, they're now granddad jokes. And they said, give me an example, which I won't give you on the air because then nobody would ever listen to me again. But my son-in-law over Thanksgiving said to me, he said, you apologize more than any person I've ever met. And of course, I looked at him and said, so you're saying you think I'm wronger than anybody you know? Of course, that's not something a son-in-law necessarily wants to hear from his father-in-law. He goes, no, that's not what I meant. But the thing is, when you messed up, you're the winner. I'm just telling you, you're the one that gets the freedom. You're the one that heals when you apologize for your mistakes. And it really helps you not make the same ones over again.
So good. So good.
I want to ask you about a core concept that comes out of transformational leadership. I don't know in the current way that you're approaching this, if you go about it the same way, but you wrote a book about it called Relational Leadership. And this is a really key idea for appreciating people in your life, in any organization, which you define as, 2 or more people working together on the same thing? I don't have the same mission.
Same mission.
So with that, we have people that are more oriented towards getting it done, transactions, and we have people that are more oriented toward the process. And as I've talked with people in the different spheres that I occupy, a lot of times trouble arises right there because we don't appreciate the differences within the workplace.
Yeah, I would say that that's one of the biggest sources of conflict on any team that I've ever worked with. And they don't even realize it's a source of conflict because they've never heard it before. But once they hear it, they go, oh my, that is what we're doing to each other. And you're right. On one end, we have people who are highly relational. The most important part of their day is who they get to be with. They love to tell stories. They like to chit chat before the work begins. If a conflict comes up, it's going to be all about the relationship. It's not going to be about getting the work done, but that's where they live. And on the other end, we have highly task-oriented or transactional people. It's not that they can't be relational, but they want to chit-chat after the work's done. Relational people, they have trouble focusing on getting the work done if the relationship's not good. Transactional people have trouble focusing on the relationship if the transaction's not finished. When conflicts comes, they go to get in the process, the task finished. They go clean the kitchen. They don't go take care of the relationship. And the hard part about this is it's not right or wrong. It's just how we're naturally made or bent, if you will. And so that book and the TL training, the intent is to help highly relational people become more transactional, and also affirm people that are transactional, because they bring something to the table that highly relational people don't necessarily bring. And highly transactional people, if they can become more relational, then what will happen is these relational people, believe it or not, will actually start working a lot harder. In other words, if you take 2 or 3 minutes and talk to them at the beginning of the day, they're going to be far more productive. And so if these two can meet in the middle, if you will, and that's what we call a relational leader, a transformational relational leader. And what does that mean? That means that you built the relationship so deep that no transaction could separate you. Doesn't mean you won't look for a new job or move to another city, but the transaction itself can't separate you. And number 2, you can stand in the middle of this continuum, look down both ends, and neither end drives you crazy. And if you remember, I probably did this in the training that y'all went to originally, where I ask, if you're married and you're highly relational, raise a hand. If your spouse is highly transactional, raise your other hand. And I did it the other way. And if you remember, possibly 100% of the married couples' hands were in the air, but I've never seen it less than 80%. Often it's both. And so what happens is, we need highly relational people. We need highly transactional people in our lives. Highly transactional people, we need highly transactional relational people in our lives. And if we can learn to honor that, accept it, and work together, the productivity, well, number 1, the conflict takes a nosedive. And when the conflict takes a nosedive, we all know what happens. Productivity goes straight up.
Yeah.
And the thing to remember, even if you get really good at relational, I think Jesus was very relational, if you read the Bible closely, but we all have a default. In other words, however we were born is our default. And so, for example, when conflict comes, you're going to default to whatever your natural inclination is. Now, Jesus was perfect, so he could default both ways. He could go whichever direction he needed to go at the time. An example will be, this morning I got up and I looked at my calendar. My natural bent is more relational, but you can't grow the company the size we grew a company in the 90s without some transaction, right? I mean, I'm also transactional, but I looked at my calendar and I'm telling you, a big smile came to my face as I looked at what I get to do today. And this was the first thing on my list. And so, to be able to look and see the people that I'm going to be with today, my heart just exploded, because that's my natural default. And we all have a natural default.
That's great.
I love this. I love this so much. A couple things. Number 1, a lot of this is it just comes down to just pausing and having someone teach it to you. I mean, I think that's the thing, is what Ford teaches. It's all right there in front of us. It's just having someone to lay it out and explain it to you. Like, I could have told you who in our company was, transactional. I could have told you that, yes, it's good to apologize. I could have told you, yes, it's good not to gossip. But when you really dive into these different topics and break it down, this is stuff every single person needs, and it affects every area.
It sure does.
Your life. It does.
I had an epiphany that day in the seminar that we were at, that you were leading, Ford, when you did the relational transactional stuff. And I've always thought of myself as highly relational. And then when you described it, I realized I am a transactional person. And this explains some things. And it really helps me, because there are times when I'm trying to get something done and somebody's trying to chit-chat that I'm very irritated and I can't focus. And it really helped me in my marriage, helped me in this partnership with these two sitting next to me, helped me in the place I show up in church, to realize that and to be a little bit more sensitive and more appreciative of those who are not wired the same way by default that I am. So thank you. That's very valuable.
This is why you became a verb for us, because you gave us a common vocabulary, and now we understand. So we can just say, well, let's go Ford Taylor that.
Yeah.
And because we all have this common vocabulary, we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's so good.
Let me ask you
common
one more
language
thing.
is key.
It is.
Sorry about that. Yeah, one more thing here, Ford. I just want to broaden the lens because we might have folks listening that feel this. You find out some of these principles and truths that you have been talking about today. And I'll just give you an example from my personal life, and I'm already today seeing where I messed up. But I have a very close friend, let's say it like that. They were working for a very large company, and I was hearing stories of how their day was, and it was frustrating day after day. And I looked at the situation, and I thought to myself, they need to bring Ford Taylor in to this place. I could look at it even with what I know, and I'm not an administratively gifted person at all. I would never put me in charge of a large organization. I could be in support, but I could look at that and I could say to them, if they would do this and they would do that and they would do this, it would so improve what they're doing. And I think where I made a mistake was I'm sitting here talking to the person who has influence in that organization, and I missed it. I just was thinking, gosh, I wish we could get Ford or somebody in your organization to come and address this company because it meant something to me. I would like to see that happen. It wasn't any of my business, so I couldn't stick my my nose into that. But do you have people that say, I feel so frustrated because I don't feel like this organization's in bad shape and I don't know what to do? And where should someone start in a scenario like that?
Well, again, and y'all know, I don't promote our stuff a lot. We don't do a lot of marketing. Everything we do pretty much is word of mouth. I mean, there's a little bit out there now because of the podcast and COVID hitting and kind of forced into doing some of it, but just to keep getting the information out to people. But I would encourage them to find some tools that they could use to go impact their boss. I mean, some of the places that I've personally worked in that have had the most success, I was brought in because of someone in the organization having an impact on the owner or the president. And they would say, where did you learn that? I mean, one of my clients right now that's grown huge started mentoring this young lady, and you ought to have her on the show sometimes, but when she was a hostess in a restaurant. And then she came to me, I'd been mentoring her husband, and she asked me to mentor her, and I gave her some insights on how to approach the CEO, and she had wanted to move to the corporate office. It was her dad, and I gave her some insights on how to approach him. And well, first she went and asked him to let her hire me as her executive coach. He told her no, and I said, well, I'm already mentoring your husband. You are like kids to me. I'll just keep working with you too. And then she said, what would you do first? And I told her, and she said, you want me to go 6-step my dad? I said, yeah, you're treating him like your dad, not like the CEO of the company. Anyway, so she went and she did that. And one other thing she asked me, and she did both of them. And in that meeting, he said, I think you're ready to move to the corporate office. One meeting. And then he said, where did you learn to do this? And she said, from that guy that you wouldn't let me hire. And he said, you ready? And he said, go hire him right now. But my point was, I wouldn't take her money because I'd already committed. But she's now, she was promoted to operations, then president. Now she's the CEO. And all I'm saying is her influence that one day, those years ago, on that one meeting, took her level straight up. I mean, straight up. And now she'll tell you the company is so much more profitable. The culture's completely different. That's their industry. They have high suicide rate, high alcoholism, high divorce rate. And they've just seen those rates take a nosedive as they've grown to hundreds more employees and more locations. But that's how you do it. I would share with anybody who has feedback for their boss, okay, is that you would find something that you've done that you can apologize for. Something that you could say, and it could be, could I share something with you? I may be wrong, but I'd like to share it. But before I start, I'd like to say something. This is something I wish I'd shared a long time ago, but I was afraid. And out of my fear, I did not do it. And that means I didn't care enough about you. I cared more about me. And I've been wrong, and I'm sorry. Will you forgive me for caring more about me than you? And will you hold me accountable, assuming I have a job here after we finish? Would you hold me accountable Is there anything else I owe you an apology for? You'll be amazed if you start there and then say, could I give you some feedback? I may be wrong. Or maybe if you gossiped about your boss, just apologize for it. Do the 6-step about that, and then go into, could I share how I'm feeling? And maybe do an affirmation. Thank your boss for providing you a job. And so do some of those things before you give the feedback. And then when you do give the feedback, know that you may be wrong. You've just apologized for not caring enough about them. So now you're going to prove that you care more about them than whether or not you have a job. You'll be blown away what will happen with your influence, again, with 99% of the people out there. If you happen to work for, and I'm talking about not the woke narcissist definition, but diagnosed narcissist. If someone has a multiple personality disorder, if they're bipolar, if they have an illness, that might not work. But most people, if you approach it that way, your influence will go through the roof, and most of the time you're going to get heard, and you're going to probably be the one that gets promoted over the person next to you who didn't say anything.
Good. If folks wanted to get in touch with you, Ford, how would they do that? So you do have a website now?
Well, yeah. So our company website is called transformlead.com.
Okay.
I do my best to kind of stay in the founder's role in the consulting company because I'm so busy doing so many other things. If they wanted to hear the podcast or read the blogs, that one's called FordTaylorTalks.com.
Okay.
And then if they wanted the online platform, that's called TLOnDemand.com.
Okay.
But if they wanted to talk to a live person, I would go to transformlead.com, and our CEO, CFO, different people will respond.
Okay, awesome.
Or they could reach out to me personally. They could reach out to me on the Ford Taylor Talks, but I'll probably refer them over.
Yeah. And we'll put all those.
Right.
Yeah, we'll put
what
all
if they want to get lit, though?
They want to get
lit. If they want to get lit, they probably ought to listen to the podcast and read the blogs
funny.
and stuff. That's probably a good way to get lit.
We'll put all those links at themorningcruise.com. Ford, as always, it's so good to see you and talk to you. And when we get in our new building, I hope that you will come see it and come visit us in person.
Well, I got to tell you, it's always an honor, and with, of course, my granddad jokes. I'm sure you hear this a lot. A joy to be with you. Always. And even in the training, I say, be careful with words like you should, you need, always, never. But I can tell you, I don't have to be careful with it on this one. It is always an honor and a joy to be with you all on your show, to be with you live outside the show. If there's anything I can ever do for you, I'm at your service. You're a blessing. I love you dearly.
We love you, Ford. Thank you.